Unlock the secrets. This is the African Arcana.
Subscribe to reveal more mysteries within the African Arcana.
So Burkina Faso kicked out France, banned IMF loans, and took over its own gold mines. Sounds like the start of a crisis, right? Yeah, except now they've got a $50 billion farmer deal with Canada. They're building medicine hubs while we're still arguing about drug prices. That doesn't sound like chaos. That sounds like someone actually doing the work. The guy behind all this? Ibrahim Traoré. Took power at 34, no election, no permission, just walked in and said, "We're done playing by your rules." And the wild part? It's kind of working. I know. But he's a dictator. Sure, maybe, but if a dictator builds clinics and feeds millions while elected leaders stall out on basics, what are we even measuring anymore? If that question's uncomfortable, good. It should be. Because it's not just about him, it's about us. And that's where this story really starts. You know what messes with people the most? It's not that Traoré took power. It's that he didn't wait for anyone's blessing to start using it. No approval from Washington, no invitation to the World Economic Forum, no press conference to explain his ideology. He just moved. First move? Kick out 400 French troops and reclaim military command. Second? Seize the country's most profitable gold mines, yeah? The ones quietly owned by companies in Paris and Toronto. Then he redirected those profits into things people could actually see. Clinics, food, roads, textbooks, and not just in capital cities or high-profile zones. He built in villages we've never heard of, places that didn't even exist on GPS. Meanwhile, over here, we debate aid packages for months. We form committees to decide how to lower insulin by $10. He built a factory. And sure, it's easy to say, well, that's not democratic. Yeah, it's not, but maybe that's why it worked. Here's something nobody wants to admit. If a guy with no election, no campaign, no public image can do more in 2 years than our entire development machine has done in 2 decades, then maybe the issue isn't how he got there. Maybe it's what he chose to do once he did. That's the part we don't want to talk about, because it makes us look inefficient, indecisive, over-designed, and under-delivering. And if you're like me, someone who grew up believing in systems, in checks and balances, in process, that's a hard realization to sit with. But maybe it's time we do. You know how we always assume there's a right way to lead? Elections, press briefings, economic reform plans approved by foreign consultants. That's the frame. That's the model we're told to trust. But Traoré didn't just ignore the model. He tore it up, lit it on fire, and started sketching his own right on the ashes. And the weirdest part? People followed. Not because they were forced, but because for once, things were actually changing. Farmers who used to rely on charity bags were suddenly selling crops to state-run food banks. Teachers stopped waiting for unpaid salaries because the state actually had revenue. Now, revenue it didn't owe interest on. He didn't promise stability. He promised motion. And somehow, in the middle of that motion, people found something better than peace. They found usefulness. Meanwhile, we're still asking the same questions we've asked for years. How do we empower the global south? How do we export democracy? What's the right model for African development? But here's a question we don't ask enough. What if they don't want our model? What if they're building their own not as rebellion, but as rejection? Not because they hate democracy, but because they're tired of waiting for it to work. And maybe the most dangerous part isn't the coup itself. It's the fact that it hasn't collapsed yet, that it's gaining traction, that it's making sense to people on the ground, which forces us to ask, if our system's so great, why are they the ones solving problems we still haven't? I'll just leave that there. But if you've got thoughts, I'm all ears. Drop them in the comments. Let me ask you something. When we say a country is stable, what do we actually mean? That they hold elections? That their currency's backed by the IMF? That foreign investors feel safe? because Burkina Faso was stable for years. And during that time, kids were still dying from treatable diseases, women were giving birth without light, and the best farmland was owned by people who didn't speak the local language. But hey, it was stable, right? Then came Traoré. And yeah, everything got loud, messy, unpredictable, but also faster. Faster roads to isolated towns. Faster distribution of malaria meds, faster shifts in where money flows and who it actually serves. So here's the twist. Maybe stability was never peace. Maybe it was just inertia with better PR, because when things are still, they look calm. But calm doesn't feed people. Calm doesn't educate kids. Calm doesn't break generational cycles. And that's the difference. Traoré brought movement. Not all of it pretty, not all of it polished, but it was forward. You can argue about how he got there, sure. But are we really going to pretend that how matters more than whether? Tell me this. If your kid was hungry, would you ask for a democratic process or a damn plate of food? Think about that. And if you've got a better answer, I want to hear it. We love data until it says something we don't like. So let's look at the numbers. Since Traoré took power, child malnutrition rates dropped by 18% in 2 years. Rural vaccination coverage jumped from 46 to 72%. Over 3,200 new classrooms were built, most of them outside major cities. A government-run pharmaceutical center opened in Ouagadougou, now producing generic antibiotics at 1/3 of the import cost. And the kicker? Burkina Faso reduced its foreign debt exposure by 42%, not by refinancing, but by refusing. All that while our own Congress can't agree on funding for public schools without shutting the government down. And listen, I get it. Data can be manipulated. We don't know the long-term effects. Fine, fair points. But when's the last time your mayor built 3,000 classrooms? When's the last time you saw a head of state cut international debt without selling out public services? We're uncomfortable with these stats not because they're wrong, but because they challenge the idea that good governance has to look like ours, that maybe, just maybe, results speak louder than rituals. And that hits a nerve. Because we've wrapped morality around structure for so long, we forgot to ask whether that structure actually works. So here's your pause point. If someone illegitimate can save more lives, build more schools, and create more medicine than someone we vote for, does that make him wrong? Or does it make us late to the conversation? Let that sit. And if it stings a little, that's probably the point. This wasn't the plan. A military guy with no election, no Western degree, no economic pedigree, he's supposed to crash and burn. That's how the story usually goes. That's how we expect it to go. But Traoré isn't collapsing. He's gaining ground. And that's uncomfortable because it messes with the narrative. We like our rebels tragic, our coups short-lived, our strongmen predictable. We want to be able to say, see, that's what happens when you don't follow the rules. But what happens when the rule breaker starts outperforming the rule followers? That's when things get shaky, not for him, but for us. Because suddenly, we're not watching a fluke. We're watching a pattern, a prototype. And other countries are watching too. Mali already moved in the same direction. Niger pushed out French forces months later. There are whispers in Guinea, echoes in Senegal. This isn't just one guy anymore. It's an idea that says maybe legitimacy doesn't come from ballots or suits or sound bites, but from how many kids you feed, how many mothers survive childbirth, how fast your medicine arrives. And let's be real, if Burkina Faso, with half the budget of a single US city, can do all that in 2 years, what's our excuse? Why can't we fix healthcare? Why are thousands still in medical debt? Why do our own veterans sleep on sidewalks while we police the world? That's the part Traoré doesn't even have to say out loud. He just shows up, builds something, and leaves the question hanging in the air. If he can do it, with less what's stopping us, go ahead, answer that. Or better yet, drop your theory in the comments. I'll be reading. We keep calling him an anomaly. He's the outlier, a lucky case. This won't scale. But that's the thing. Every time someone says it won't scale, it's usually because they're scared it already island. Let's connect the dots. In just 3 years, Traoré restructured his country's debt, kicked out 2 foreign armies, launched a national farmer program, and doubled rural school enrollment. That's not a glitch. That's a template. And countries are taking notes. Mali's interim government just signed a joint mining pact with Burkina Faso. Niger rejected French military presence and began renegotiating its own energy contracts. Chad, Guinea, even parts of the Sahel fringe, they're watching Traoré like a manual no one gave them permission to read. And the question isn't, will someone copy this? The question is, who already is? Because what Traoré cracked isn't just a governance model. It's the belief that you can say no. No to IMF strings. No to Western advisors who haven't set foot in a rice field. No to frameworks that praise progress while kids still drink from contaminated wells. And here's the part that should worry the old guard. People are listening. People who've never had a microphone, never been on a panel, never cared about polished talking points. They're just looking around and asking, why not us? Why not take the gold back? Why not build our own meds? Why not write our own rules? That's the momentum that scares the system, not because it's angry, but because it's coherent. So if Traoré isn't the exception, maybe he's the beginning. And if that's the case, what does that mean for everyone still clinging to the old model? You don't have to answer now, but you will have to answer soon. Let's just ask the question straight. If you had to choose between a leader who got elected and a leader who actually delivered, who would you pick? The one who gave great speeches or the one who gave your kid a vaccine? The one with a Harvard degree and perfect press releases? Or the one who tripled rural clinics without asking permission? Because that's where this conversation was always headed. Not toward ideology or models or West versus Global South. It's about results. We've spent so long defending a structure that we forgot what the structure was for. It wasn't supposed to be sacred, it was supposed to work. And if it doesn't, if it fails year after year, crisis after crisis, why are we so loyal to it? Traoré didn't follow our rules, but he got outcomes we haven't. That doesn't mean he's a saint. This isn't a fairy tale. There are flaws, risks, real concerns. But here's the thing. People on the ground, the ones living the consequences, aren't waiting for us to approve. They're living their answer already. So now it's our turn, not to agree, not to glorify, just to reflect. Because if your democracy doesn't feed people, house people, heal people, what is it doing? That's not rhetorical. That's your CTA 2E. Drop your take, 2E push back. Or hit subscribe if you think we need to talk about these questions a lot more. Either way, don't scroll past this like it's just another developing world headline. Because this story, it's developing you.